Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am Chris White, your host, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome this week's guests. And by the way, as a reminder, folks, these are live conversations. This hasn't been recorded a week ago. As I like to say, these are unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And today's show is particularly unique. I've invited two women who have a significant amount of pre-sales experience and a great deal of passion for what we do. And I've had the opportunity to speak with both of them on a few occasions. They've never actually met. So they've just now met a few minutes ago. And just in the few minutes backstage, I could tell this is going to be a great conversation. Hannah Bloking and Lara Meadows, thank you so much for being here. How are you both doing?
Excited.
Very excited to be here.
We're just talking about this. We're all from sort of the DC area. We actually have 3 Virginia universities represented, but Hannah's now out in Seattle. Lara and I are still here in the DC area. Let me do just a brief introduction. So let's start with Lara. Lara is the VP of Pre-Sales with ThreatConnect. And Lara, do you mind just taking a minute and giving a little bit more elaborate introduction on yourself?
Absolutely. So Lara Meadows, thank you, Chris, for the great introduction. I have been in pre-sales for a long number of years. I refuse to actually divulge what that number is. But when I first started with pre-sales, it actually wasn't a thing. So when I went to college, I studied engineering and came out and I did industrial and systems engineering, which I always said was engineering with a business tag. And so when I graduated, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I got pulled over into this cool cybersecurity team and then learned about this role that was working with a sales team. And I was like, oh, what? I'm an engineer. Why would I go work in sales, right? And so got pulled over into the sales engineering role. And I will tell you my name and my title. I mean, my title has evolved. You know, I've been a solution architect. I've been a solution consultant. I've been a security engineer, you know, all different names for the roles and the different titles, but all essentially doing the same thing. So I've had this opportunity to work with all different facets of customers, from the federal government to, you know, Fortune 100s, and have been doing this for a long time and get to work with lots of cool people and lots of great teams.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you've now moved into obviously a leadership role, and now you're equally passionate about empowering your team members and enabling your team members as you are the profession. And we're going to get into that a little bit deeper. Allow me to give Hannah an opportunity to introduce herself. So Hannah is. And I actually wrote it down because it's a particularly interesting job title, the Technical Business Development Leader with AWS. And you're really part of the go-to-market team working with Amazon Connect, right?
That's right.
When new products or new features, new capabilities roll out, your role is really scale and adoption. Am I saying that correct, Hannah?
You said it correct. You can tell that you've been in pre-sales. You take great notes.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Hannah, here's one of the things I love about this conversation. Lara, you have an engineering background, an engineering degree from Virginia Tech. I'll give your Hokies a shout out. I have a software engineering degree from JMU. So we weren't quite the technology school. Hannah, on the other hand, Hannah has a very different degree. Hannah, do you mind taking a minute and talking a little bit more about your background and how you got into pre-sales?
Yeah, I would love to. So yeah, a little even less traditional, I think. So back in the day, I was a dance and choreography major at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I was telling Chris earlier that I saw a job advertisement on Craigslist, which I think dates me a little bit, and applied because I was looking for a job just to save some money and move to New York to become a professional dancer. But long story short, I am, over a decade later sitting in this chair right here. But ultimately, kind of really realized that I had a passion for technology, and kind of quickly transitioned from sort of like an entry-level type of role into a customer-facing training type of role, which led me to take a role at Oracle in a professional services capacity. So I was a functional consultant for several years, and very similar to Lara, I was actually kind of like the claw came out, and pre-sales had reached out to me, and they were like, love to talk to you about this opportunity. We think you'd be great in this pre-sales capacity. Lara, what you said resonated with me. I was like, nope, I hate sales. Not for me. And they were like, I really think you don't know what sales engineering is. Long story short, they were right. I didn't know, but just kind of fell in love with it and spent about 10 years in various pre-sales roles for companies of a few different sizes, mostly in the CRM and CX space, and just super passionate about the role.
That's such a great entry. Thank you so much. By the way, I don't know if you noticed. So Walter Munn, thanks for tuning in. Former professional ballroom dancer, instructor, and choreographer turned pre-sales as well. How funny is that? By the way, folks, if you're live with us, we can't actually see you. So if you care to say hello to either Lara or Hannah or ask any questions, please feel free. Lara, let's build upon what Hannah shared. You know, and I felt the same way when I first got into sales. I sort of felt like sales was below me a little bit. Can you remember some moments early in your career where your opinion, your attitude towards sales started to shift?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, I work for a small startup, and we had 50 people in the company. And it was back in the days when we were actually going to the office. So I'd be sitting in the same office with my counterpart, my sales rep that I supported. And so I think a lot of times as SEs, we get called into the meetings and we don't see all the work that's gone in to get that one meeting where we've been pulled in. And so to get pulled in, I just listened to them dialing after customer after customer after customer, you know, and then he'd score a deal or score a meeting and say, come on, we've got somewhere to go and go meet with them. So, you know, I put on my cape and go. And I loved it because it was a great eye-opening experience to see how hard it is actually on the sales side, how much goes into it. And then just to watch the whole sales cycle evolve, right? What we do and how much goes into our side, well, especially from the technical side, to understanding what are the customer's needs, what are their pains, but then how do you build a solution? So there's this opportunity to build. And I think a lot of times we are in sales, but we do get to build. And so that was eye-opening to me to be able to see both sides of it.
You know, those words strike such a chord with me. It's one of the things I say in some of the workshops is as SEs, we oftentimes don't see all the work that goes into just getting the meeting, right? Before we're even invited to the party, as I like to say, there's a tremendous amount of work that takes place that we don't see. And so you're right, to have the opportunity to see that firsthand early in your career, I can see where that would open. But to your point, that's what's great about our role, right? Is we're obviously in sales, but we still get to build, right? We still get to solution. But by the way, you have quite a few fans chiming in to say hello. So I feel like we just need to, say hello to Michelle. I don't actually see who this is, but another shout. And actually a gentleman that I worked with a number of years ago, Derek Marino, chimes in. Hannah, allow me to ask a similar question of you. Was there some point early in your career after you moved into this sales engineer role, this pre-sales, where all of a sudden sales didn't feel like a 4-letter word?
Yeah, I mean, I would say almost immediately. I think in a professional services role, which is so important to the customer experience and delivering customer requirements, I think what I really loved about sales and pre-sales right away was you got to actually go in with a point of view before the customer had really finalized their requirements and really have the opportunity to use all of your creativity and to influence them. And I think that's such an important role. And, Lara, to your point, I think like early on in my pre-sales career, it was kind of easy to be dismissive to salespeople. And I just want to like give salespeople like a round of applause because as you start to work with them more and more, especially I think as you get more senior and you're maybe even more involved a little bit higher earlier on, more top of funnel. I think you really see like how much it takes to not only get the meeting, but to coordinate all the right people, to make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing in the meeting and everybody's driving towards the right next steps. I think that because we are so lucky to be sitting in the seat where we work with so many salespeople, you see a lot of things they do right, and you see a lot of things that they do wrong. So over time, you have the opportunity to really take that trusted advisor role to your seller and really help them drive the right outcomes. And you're really influencing the momentum and the velocity of that opportunity that you're working on together.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered your question, but I think almost immediately sales is not a 4-letter word. It's probably one of the best places to land when you really want to get introduced to customers and what they're really trying to accomplish before they even know.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I sincerely believe that to sell is to serve. And it's interesting, Lara, you were mentioning this in the few minutes before we joined, that similar to what Hannah was saying, in our unique role, not only do we work with sales, but we work with product, with marketing, with customer success. Do you care to share a little bit more on your perspective from that angle?
So I was saying beforehand, I think pre-sales is the best kept secret in any company, right? We have the best job hands down. We have so much control of what our days look like, what our job looks like. We get to be solution providers. We get to build, but we also get to interact and work with every department pretty much within the company. So I believe that we are the direct arm for product marketing and product management, right? So that how we can directly influence the direction of the product. It's so important for us to have that direct communication with and be that voice of here's what the field is saying. And then also going back to the customer, here's what we're saying. Here's where we're seeing our product going. Here's what we're seeing is needed and how we're going to innovate and do things. I love that we work with engineering. I love that we work with marketing. I love that we work with, even facilities, helping people get stood up for, doing things around the office. And we're building something for a RSA that's coming up for us. So we've got a big show coming up, we're just directly involved. And I love that we have the ability to work with so many different parts of the business.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, Lara. I think you and I are maybe a little closer in age than Hannah. And I'm going to say that I don't think it's always been viewed by the organization as a strategic role. And I do think that's beginning to shift a little bit. But are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing that there's more of a recognition within organizations of the strategic role?
100%. And I'll tell you, when I first started, we were the redheaded stepchild. I can't tell you how many sales meetings, sales leaderships, QBRs, CKOs, sales kickoffs, whatever you want to call it, where, it was the sales. Oh, and then pre-sales, and not realizing what an important step we were in the sales process and how pivotal, right? The relationships that we build with customers, when the rep leaves and we're sitting there in a lab and shoulder to shoulder with them, how much they divulge to us and how much intel we get, that it's been so cool to see it evolve and see how critical the pre-sales is as part of this whole sales process.
Yeah. We're the quote, we're the secret weapons of the sales team, of the go-to-market team. Incidentally, I feel like we at least need to acknowledge. So Abhishek Basu says hello. Abhishek, thanks for tuning in. And Tulsi, I hope I'm saying that right. Yes, we sit right in the middle. It's really nice to see all of you. And as I mentioned before, you're more than welcome to ask any questions. Hannah, let's take this conversation a step further. I know one of the things that we talked about briefly was imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Now, you've shared a little bit, obviously, about your background. For those of you who didn't hear, Hannah was actually studying to be a professional dancer in college, actually got a degree in dance. Has that, or did that cause you to have some of that imposter syndrome, or were there other elements of that sort of feeling of the imposter syndrome?
I mean, I think that certainly contributed to it. And it's actually one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about really talking to the pre-sales community specifically about imposter syndrome, because I think I have found that there are a lot of different backgrounds across all different disciplines that are starting to really get into this profession. But certainly, I think that when you're in a pre-sales role, you are technical. But I think the word technical can be really weaponized. And I think that, the interpretation of the word technical can really make someone kind of freeze up when they're asked questions, or they're supposed to go in and be the technical person in the room. So I think especially early on, it definitely contributed to me feeling like, when somebody would say, here's my technical person, they're here to talk about the technology and they're the smart person in the room. So I'm just going to sit down and watch while, you answer all the questions for the customer. So, I think that a lot of that, as I started to mature in my career, I realized that was like a defense mechanism for other people that were in the room, right? So I think you start to really learn how to manage a meeting, and you learn how to prepare, and you learn how to really take on that technical role, because you could be the most technical person in the world, and it doesn't mean you have to know every answer to a question that's going to come up in a meeting. So it's really just learning how to manage a meeting. And I don't think that imposter syndrome was specific to me because I was in dance, but I think it's because the word technical kept coming up that I felt like really, really unsure of myself in the beginning.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have to say, whenever I do these conversations, I always pick up so many good terms, thoughts, phrases. This notion that the word technical can be weaponized is one of the early aha moments for me. That's a really insightful way to put it. I'm interested though, Hannah, were there any parallels between dance and sort of your education and your training and what you've done out in the field as a pre-sales engineer?
Yeah, I mean, what's the one thing you do as a pre-sales person over and over again? You put yourself out there. You deal with high levels of ambiguity, and you have to stand there and be able to take constructive criticism, sometimes real time, whether that's internally when you're talking to your counterparts from all over the company. As Lara mentioned, we touch all different parts, or if you're in front of the customer. And the temperature of a customer can vary depending upon a lot of things. And I think that having just that skill of putting yourself out there, knowing that you don't have all the right information necessarily to put on a performance, and really making sure that, like, we talk a lot about value selling and making it relevant to the customer. I mean, that's all what performing is. So really having that mindset where you're thinking about how that end customer is viewing your content, I think that 100% helps me kind of like get my footing in this like new world that I was entering.
Yeah, I so see the parallels there. And I think I was mentioning this to you earlier. I've always said it's sort of like a dance, right? It's sort of like a dance with the customer, it's sort of a dance with our sales counterpart, right? So I see a lot of parallels here. Lara, let me ask you, I look at you and you have an engineering degree from Virginia Tech. You've been in pre-sales for decades. Well, for years. I'm not sure if it's decades. I'll let you clarify that.
When I was a baby.
You're a pre-sales leader, right? Is imposter syndrome anything you've ever struggled with at any point in your career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me first of all say, Hannah, I can't tell you the number of times I've had to dance in a customer call when you were going back and saying, did the dance come in? That would have helped me a lot, because especially when a customer asks, do you have a feature that you know you don't have? And you're like, get your dancing shoes on. How am I going to handle this one? So dancing has come in handy quite a bit. I wish I knew how to dance. But imposter syndrome, absolutely. Okay. First, I need rhythm. So no, imposter syndrome, absolutely. And I think, again, starting in my career where I was too often the only female in the room, and coming in, I think coming into any new job where you're not the expert, right? And so often we are positioned as the expert. And too often we get thrown into the field too soon because we don't have enough time to train fully. And it's like, feed you to the wolves, go. The only way you're going to learn is throwing you into the deep end. And so that's tough when you go in and you get teed up and positioned as the expert. And so there's that aspect. I will tell you, growing up and then moving into leadership, there's an element of imposter syndrome where you have to, maybe it's a sense of, and sometimes I think it comes from inside, right? We don't think we're good enough, but we are good enough. And so maybe it's our own insecurities and that's one of the biggest things that I think I've had to overcome over the years, realizing that I do deserve that seat at the table, that I do have the knowledge and I do have a different perspective, right? And being able to represent that different perspective. And so it's tapping into that rather than, yes, I don't know this specific thing, so I shouldn't be here. No, but I do know a lot of other things, and that's why I am here.
Yeah, yeah, really, really powerful words. And in fact, it leads me to ask: is it something that you sort of look for or look to be aware of in your people, that maybe they're struggling with a little bit of imposter syndrome from time to time? And is there certain things that you say to them or coach them in regards to that?
So, it's interesting. I never really thought of it as imposter syndrome. So you say that. I really look at it as, how do I develop my team based on the strength that they have, the strengths that they have, or develop the strengths that they don't have, right? And so I'm big on empowering my team. And so I really like to, when I look for somebody to bring somebody on to my team, I look to see, do they have an interest in learning? Do they have an interest in tinkering? It's my thing. What do you do in your spare time? What do you play with? What do you do with? And so being able to see that you have that investigative mind, that you're going to put the time in to understand what our solution does and what we're going to be able to do. So that's what I look for a lot in team members. But then I also like to take it a step further once they come on board. How do I and challenge each person to build something that is uniquely their own, that gives them visibility to the whole company, but also that's something that, it helps our team as well. So
Yeah.
I really, at the beginning of the year, like to work with each of my SEs or each of the team leads to have this project that you own. And it's something that you develop throughout the year that you get to work on. And I'm all about, how introducing it to the broader company. If it's something that leadership needs to, know about, having them present it to leadership, so then leadership gets to see them. And it's all about developing those passions and those skills that you have, and then also sharing it with the rest of the team. So maybe somebody doesn't know, something that you're really strong on. By teaching them, sharing with them, you're teaching everyone else to fish as well, based on what your strengths are. Hopefully that makes sense.
I have to say that's really inspiring. In fact, it makes me want to go back into the field and ask you for a job if that's the way you run your team. I mean, I hope every SE leader who happens to listen to this takes something from that. I mean, the idea that you begin every year by challenging your team members to find a project that's beneficial to the organization, beneficial to the pre-sales team, and beneficial to themselves, and gives them an opportunity to grow and build their own personal brand while contributing to the organization. I mean, we could put a bow on this conversation right now and everybody would get their money's worth. I mean, that is, I just love that insight. So very, very good. But by the way, I cannot keep up with the notes and the comments. Josh chimed in and Jose chimed in, Graham chimed in. So, folks, really good to hear from you. Keep those notes and comments flowing. Hannah, let's take the conversation a little bit further. So you've recently moved beyond pre-sales. And by the way, the pre-sales community, a little sorry to see you go, but we know you're still out there doing good things. Do you mind talking a little bit about this new role and how have you taken what you learned in pre-sales and now applied it in this theater, if I can use that term? Do you see what I did there, by the way?
I did.
Good.
I love that. So I'm in a go-to-market role, and my day-to-day really involves partnering with our product team, product and engineering, and working with them on the go-to-market strategy for major new capabilities for Amazon Connect. And ultimately, I'm responsible for driving scaled adoption of those capabilities. And there's a lot that goes into that. And, when you kind of enter this ambiguous role that is really sitting in between sales and product, there's a lot of opportunity to use the skills that you fundamentally start to just get ingrained in your DNA when you're in pre-sales that are so important. Qualification, discovery, having the technical credibility to work with product and engineering on a day-to-day basis and really filter the information that's so important, but it's coming from them, and getting it back into a more consumable fashion into the field. One thing that really drew me to this role was the opportunity to really drive an enablement strategy for new capabilities. So really having, like Larry, you said, the seat at the table for that. And that was really exciting for me. And I think one of the things that I really latched onto as I became more senior in pre-sales was the sales enablement element. I think that you start to do that on a one-on-one very, very quickly as a pre-sales person. Larry, you said a lot of times, like, you're there and you kind of like outlive your sales reps at any given time as people are kind of cycling in and out of the company. So you kind of own a lot of this information. And then, you know, you're that person and you're like, wow, like I'm that expert. Everybody's coming to me for questions. But then it's like everybody's coming to me for questions and I just don't have enough time in the day and still do my job. So then you start to think about scale. And then you're like, how do I start to really be able to send people to a place to find all this information that I don't need to hold on to anymore, because I know that I can get it out and be more impactful by like really focusing my like hands-on energy into other places. So I think through those learnings over the years, I was really able to take that and apply that and feel very confident in a role like that. And I'm really enjoying it. But as I said earlier, I never leave the pre-sales community. I'm very involved in it and I stay connected because I think like where I'm really passionate about is getting people into the role and feeling confident taking that leap, even if their background isn't technical. It's those other skills, Lara, you talked about developing, seeing potential and being able to really like pull them in. And you can train people on technical things. You can train them on the product. You can train them on like high level ways to talk to customers about your solution, and smart people will figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that. But before we do, I'm curious, who are your internal stakeholders then in this new role? And does it include pre-sales as well as the sellers and customer success?
Oh yeah, the whole gambit of the go-to-market team. I would say that I rely very heavily on our pre-sales team because, you know, for all those reasons that we just mentioned, the proximity they are to our customers and to their requirements and to really understanding outcomes and having the longevity and seniority and tenure with them. I rely on them very heavily for their input that influences what I do on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
And it's great being able to partner with them because, you know, they're my people.
And do some of the things that you do, does that translate into some of the collateral, maybe even some of the demo stories and demo scripts that they would actually use out in the field as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, I think what we end up using, if nothing else for inspiration, but often more than that, you know, comes from things that they're developing because they have to develop them real time, right? Like they're on a clock, they have a meeting and they have to get something out. So a lot of what they're creating is ultimately what influences what I'm doing, and then that ultimately influences what we talk about and look at with product marketing. That's a big stakeholder. You know, partners, because partners are going to be a big part of it. So really across the whole gambit and how we think about the end deliverables when we're looking to go scale this.
It's such an interesting role, and I talk to a lot of people who ask, they're sales engineers, and a lot of them ask me, what are some of the area or other things that I can do? And of course, there's, you know, you can go the management path like Lara has done. You can get into product management, product marketing, customer success, but you seem to have carved a really interesting niche that plays on a lot of those pre-sales skills. But by the way, Lara, apparently Abhishek agrees with me. He's chiming in that he'd love to be a part of your team. You might get some resumes as a result of this conversation. Lara, let's take this conversation.
Can I just say one thing? I think, Hannah, what you were talking about, I think completely aligned. I loved hearing what you were talking about because you were talking about enablement, right? And how important it is with our teams as people come on and being able to give them that expanded. I just think learning is so important in our role as SEs. And so having a person like you and having an outlet and a source of information for the pre-sales team is huge. I just love, I mean, enablement. My old company, my nickname was Miss Enablement, because I loved so much about how much more can we learn? You know, I like to say that the SEs, we have three, like we're a three-legged stool, right? And there's three areas of development. There is the technical product element that you have to know. There is the sales, understanding sales, right? And then understanding the industry that we're in. And those three things consistently have to be developed and have to be, I mean, they're constantly evolving and they're constantly changing. So keeping up with those three legs of the stool, if you will, are so important. So I love hearing you talk about the enablement, and I think the empowerment, and I think that kind of ties back to the imposter syndrome that we were talking about, right? Giving people the confidence so that when they walk into the meeting, that they know what they're talking about because they've been enabled and been empowered.
You know, I think getting a great advocate and mentor is so important. Like, and that would be the first thing I'd recommend to anybody. And it's like somebody that's safe to say I have imposter syndrome and I'm scared. I'm scared to go into this meeting because I'm worried that I don't have all the information. And I think one of the best earlier pieces of advice that I got from somebody who was a sales engineer but was much more senior than me at the time, you know, he said, you know what, you go in, you're the smartest person in the room. Nobody knows what you know. And I always have to kind of tell myself that. That's like my meeting affirmation. You know, it's like I'm the smartest person in the room.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The other thought that comes to mind is, and this is really where the big S of sales engineer comes to play, is that in spite of the fact, or even though we're the smartest person in the room, there are times that we need to let the prospect believe that he or she is the smartest person in the room, and let them know that we recognize that, right? And now we're back to the dance, Lara, right? Like, this is where there are times that we need to be the smartest person in the room. There are times we need to let them be the smartest person in the room. Incidentally, speaking of the imposter syndrome, and Lara, I think you were just touching on this. So this, I'm assuming this, it says Marjorie. I'm guessing that may be Margie Abdelkreem. She, and by the way, Marge, good to see you. How do we differentiate imposter syndrome from lack of preparedness? Good question. Lara, do you care to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think it's really an internal. Lack of prepared is something you can control. Imposter, I don't think you can. Well, it's a mental, right? Because with imposter syndrome, it's you not believing you have the ability or doubting, you know, what you know, as opposed to lack of preparedness is something that's completely within your control, right? You have a meeting coming up, you're walking into a meeting. There's so much you can do to prepare for that meeting. But then once you get in, if that imposter syndrome kicks in and you're like, oh, should I be here? Why do they think I'm the smartest person in the room? Why do they think?
Yeah. No, that's really good. That's really good. And, you know, I think sometimes we make the mistake of worrying a little bit too much about things we can't control, and we don't take enough ownership of the things we actually do control, right? And we need to channel our focus there. So yeah, that's really good.
Where, you know, I think especially, you know, as you're new to something, that's where it's so important to speak up and be proactive and ask for help if you need it. Because a lot of being early in pre-sales, I think, is just learning what being prepared means. It doesn't mean that you're not trying, but you don't know what you don't know. And in fact, if I have time, I can share like my first story, because sometimes you're gonna fail, and I have failed many of times very publicly. You know, I was trained when I was a new sales engineer to deliver our demo beginning to end. And I didn't really realize, it didn't click that you could kind of like rejigger it depending upon what your scenario was. So I went in to deliver a demo as part of an RFP and delivered just the standard demo, and like really didn't know how to tailor a conversation like relative to an RFP where the customer was sitting there with a set of requirements, like trying to follow along in my story, and I wasn't referencing the requirements, and like seeing if they could check the box. And it was just like this massive, it was a failure, and it was so embarrassing. But I can tell you what, I never made that mistake again. And I think like the biggest learning was I should have spoken up early and said, I don't know how to approach this, and somebody would have like steered me in the right direction.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I also think it's okay to fail, and that's part of imposter syndrome is being okay with failing. You know, there wasn't bad intention, and it wasn't because I didn't prepare. I just didn't prepare correctly, and you learn.
Really well said. I mean, it brings me back to a few demos early in my career where, I mean, it was like you're in the room and you can literally see the train. You feel and see the train wreck happening, and you know you're driving the train, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know,
Can't get off the train. Can't get off. Yes.
Exactly. By the way, Marjorie says, "Is there another Marjorie in the SE world?" Chris, no, there's not. So I'll give you props. Jose, and I hope I'm pronouncing Payas, I believe is how it's pronounced, has asked a great question. I don't know if either of you care to give some consideration to this. What do you think of the idea of that a pre-sales manager must be an excellent pre-sales engineer? I feel it fails to recognize that sometimes the best coaches are not necessarily the best players. I think this is an interesting one. Do either of you have an opinion that you care to share?
I think it depends what level you're managing. I think that's my opinion. I think when you have more of a junior team that probably needs more hands-on day-to-day support, I think that it's really important to have to be close to what the pre-sales role is. I think if you're, maybe like a level up from that, not a first-line manager or higher, I think that's when you really can be that person that's influencing the overall strategy and putting the right structure in place to make your team succeed. And you don't necessarily have to have been like a 10-year pre-sales engineer or 20-year pre-sales engineer to properly do that.
Yeah. Lara, do you
100% agree. I think 100% agree. I would also go and ask Jose that what's his definition of an excellent pre-sales engineer, because I think a lot of times, getting to that excellent status is tough. I do think it's important for anyone in sales engineering leadership to have, personally for me, I want to know all the technical in and outs of the product. I need to be able to demo. I need to be able to talk intelligently. I need to be able to go in front of customers. But most importantly, understanding the technical nuances, how the product works, is important for me to develop my team. Because if I don't know what the product does, if I don't know what we're doing, how can I possibly work with the PM team? How can I possibly develop the team? Know where we need to grow and what we need to do. And so I have worked with pre-sales managers in the past who have zero technical prowess. And they're still equally great. They develop the team in different areas. But I do think for myself personally, I have to have a technical understanding and be able to do some level of that to help make my team better.
I think I agree. And I think it also builds credibility with the team. That
Yeah.
I think particularly engineers, right? Engineers are more inclined to respect their leaders if they can tell that the leaders also have some technical chops, as I like to say.
Yeah.
So, Lara, to that end, Hannah a moment ago said a few words about skills and some of the different types of skills, and I was curious because I know and you've talked about how important it is for you to build your teams, empower your teams, help them grow. Are there certain skills that you look to hire for over develop, and certain skills where you're not as concerned about hiring for because you can develop them?
Yeah, I think with pre-sales, again, the backgrounds that people come from are so diverse, and understanding that, number one, are you a people person, right? Are you going to be able to go in and talk to a customer and have a conversation? I've had some engineers, I've worked with introverts, I've worked with extroverts, right? I think in the pre-sales we have both, and they are both equally great in their own way, but can they have a conversation with the customer? If they're going to go in, and I've had some that were not good, and they had to leave the team because they couldn't carry on a conversation. They couldn't, ask questions. They couldn't be responsive. And so I think first and foremost, what I look for in a person are they personable? Are they going to be able to go and interact with the customer as well as the sales team? I mean, sales teams are fun, right? And you've got some quirky personalities, and are they going to mix with the personalities of that? And then again, the second thing that I look for is, do they have that want to learn, to tinker, to develop, and to play? And so I want to be able to trust that when they are at home in between sales meetings, that they are doing things to make their demo better, to make our product better, to make every aspect of their life, when it comes to work, better. And so it's important that they are going to have that discipline to do that. So that's what I look for.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear you saying, to a certain degree, you're looking for, quote, the all-round athlete, right? I mean, the individual that, again, has the interpersonal skills, has the desire and the drive, curiosity comes into play. And what I'm hearing you say is some of the mechanics maybe about giving an effective demonstration, or maybe doing discovery in a certain way, that can be taught. But what I'm hearing is that there are some intangibles that you really look for in the individuals, whether they're introverted or extroverted, right? Whether they're, and to your point, I mean, we come in lots of different, shapes and sizes and flavors, as they say. So no, I completely agree. Hannah, when you hear Lara, share some of those observations, when you were in a hiring role, or if you were in a hiring role, are there certain skills that you would be looking for?
I would say very similar to what Lara said. Very much curiosity to learn how well they listen, how well they can communicate. I always have subscribed to the belief that smart people can be taught pretty much anything, but there are some things that people have to actively work on themselves, whether they're introverts or extroverts. And it's paying attention to signals. It's, especially in this virtual world that we're in, it's really hard to not talk over somebody, to read the room as well as you normally could back when we were in person for the majority of these activities. So I think that's just something that I would look for in any role, but particularly in a pre-sales role, where a lot of what you're going to be doing is asking questions. You're going to get into really challenging situations, and a lot of times, if a customer or an internal team member is raising an objection or raising a flag, a lot of deflecting those things is asking clarifying questions. And I think that's just a skill that you start to suss out when you start having conversations with people, and their ability to really do that and dive deep.
Yeah. Lara, I see you're smiling bright wide. I think she said something that triggered a chord for you.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's so spot on. I completely agree. And I think it's so important we have a strict policy, a no a-hole policy, because I think one person can, just change that so much. And having somebody who has that ability to communicate and be a part of the team, it's so important. So I'm 100% agree.
Well, and what came to mind, Hannah, while both of you were sharing, is this notion of EQ over IQ. Right? I mean, there's a certain assumed IQ, right? But it's that emotional intelligence, right? Hannah, you use the word signals, right? The ability to pick up signals and cues, and know when to listen and know when to speak, right? The dance, right? Know when to step forward, know when to take a step back, right? It's all those things. And it's interesting because, and this is a question out of sincere curiosity on my part. And that is, more and more people like yourselves are trying to promote the profession of pre-sales and draw more people in, which means I think we're beginning to draw more and more younger people in. Yet I think some of the skills that we're talking about are skills that are developed over the period of 5, 10, 15 years of a professional career. Mm-hmm. So how do either one or both of you think younger people getting into this profession should approach the profession if maybe they haven't had the time to develop some of those skills?
I think for me, a lot of it is understanding how people think about approaching a problem. So something I've learned through doing imposter syndrome workshops is that a lot of imposter syndrome is us thinking that our peers think that the same task that would be assigned to us would be easier for them to execute. And I think about that a lot because, let's just say it's an earlier in their career person entering pre-sales and they're asked to do a panel because that's like going to be a part of your interview process. When you're in pre-sales, you're going to have to do a presentation. I think a lot of it is how did they approach it? Did they really leverage a mentor if they were assigned one during the interview process? What did they put together? It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be like what ultimately you would send somebody out into the field with, but like how did they think about approaching the problem? And I think understanding what people's problem solving skills are will really help you take them to that next level. And they don't have to have years of professional experience to have problem solving skills.
And if I may, and Lara, I'm really eager to hear your thoughts as well. The two observations of what you just said, Hannah. First is just the fact that you see effort, right? It may not be perfect, right? It may not, but you see the effort there. But the second thing that really strikes a chord with me is, and you said, are they thinking about the other person's problems or perspective? Just thinking about the other person, right? Being as much what I like to call other-centered as we can be, rather than self-centered, which is, sort of the natural default, right? I think that's where we really begin to build that EQ. Lara, any thoughts from you? And have you been bringing in younger people to the profession?
Absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to that three-legged stool that I was talking about, and I'll use the sales leg as all inclusive, because I think there's so much when we talk about sales. It's presentation skills, it's time management, it's all these things that we're talking about I'll use a sales capacity. But one of the things that I like to do is when I bring someone on board, after, Hannah, what you just said so well, so succinctly, is when they come on board, how do you continue to develop those softer skills that are so important in our day-to-day job? And so some of the things that we do is a lot of presenting to the rest of the team. So giving people the power and the opportunity to consistently speak to your counterparts, which is like the hardest thing to do, right? And to get feedback. So we'll do something like Monday Table Topics, where it's, hey, do a 5-minute talk on what is this, something that pertains to our job, and everyone will present on it and then get feedback. Well, I think you noticed you used crutch words a lot. I noticed you were stumbling here. I noticed you were really good in this capacity. And then I noticed you missed on this thing, and we record them so that people could go back and listen. But it gives everyone an opportunity to present to each other and refine those skills that are so important to us. And I think that's a really, as I say, that's one of the things that I do think is so important for us to do, and to constantly develop those softer skills.
Honestly, I think it is harder to present to colleagues than it is to customers. And I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, maybe it's because our customers don't know what our colleagues do. So our colleagues know if we get something wrong, maybe. But have you seen that on your team as well, Lara?
Absolutely. And I think, again, it goes into your imposter syndrome, right? You're sitting there with perceived experts, and you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I can BS in front of a customer, but in front of my counterparts, they're going to call me out on it, right? And so having the confidence that if I can do this to people who are quote unquote experts, then I'm going to be good. So
really well, really well done. By the way, I don't know if you all have noticed, Michelle Duffy chimed in again. I mean, the chat has really been on fire, and it's been really nice to hear from so many people. You both have been so gracious with your time, and I can't believe it or not, we've been at this for 50 minutes, so the time has gone by very quickly. Wow. I usually close with a lightning round of questions, so I'm going to do that in just a moment. But before I do, I'll invite each one of you to maybe just to share one closing thought, that maybe something you were hoping we'd just touch on regarding pre-sales that we haven't done so. Hannah, I'll start with you. And any sort of closing comment or thought before we do our quick lightning round?
Yeah, I mean, I just encourage anybody who's kind of aspiring to be in pre-sales, whether you're currently in a different role or looking to get in kind of as an entry point, to really kind of take into the conversation today and realize that you have a lot to bring to the table, and don't be afraid to start putting yourself out there and just leveraging all of these different ways to show that you really care and that you really have these soft skills and can be trained by somebody that's looking for somebody like you.
Yeah, incredibly well said, Hannah. Lara?
Absolutely. And I would agree. And then once you come on board and you grow in the role, there's so much opportunity to grow in so many different directions and to constantly keep learning and keep getting better and refining those skills. It's such a great opportunity to be a part of this pre-sales community and be in a pre-sales role where you have that opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Well, and you know, sometimes, as I like to say, sometimes the blind squirrel picks up a nut every now and then, right? Like I got very lucky in this session to bring both of you together, and you two almost couldn't have different, at least college degrees, and yet here both of you are, successful pre-sales careers. And Hannah, I know you're getting more into a broader go-to-market strategy, but you two are the perfect example of how diverse our backgrounds can be, and yet we can find success in this profession. So I feel like I stumbled upon that accidentally, but that's a great example. So I have just a few quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. We're going to be on time because you both may have, you're both busy people. You may have meetings that you need to run to. So Hannah, very quickly, I call this tech sales advice.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask for some advice from both of you. First of all, Hannah, did you, and you mentioned a piece of advice that you got. Is there another piece of advice that you received at some point in your career that made a significant difference to you? And if so, what was that?
Yeah. I think that smartest person in the room advice has really carried me through quite a many of situations. And just like going back and really diving deep into what smart means, I think we talked a lot about this earlier in the session. Smart doesn't necessarily mean knowing every answer to everything, but it's like knowing that I know how to prepare, that I came prepared to the meeting, that I have a point of view to share in this meeting. And I've carried that advice on. I've actually delivered that same exact piece of advice to many of people since then. It's been the best piece of advice I've gotten.
I absolutely love that. And by the way, you've used the term point of view a couple times. I think that's another key term. We should always have a point of view. People may agree or disagree, right? But if in the absence of a point of view, you just sort of are drifting, right? So have a point of view. I love that. Lara, is there or was there a piece of advice that you received at some point that really made a difference?
So my memory is terrible, I'm not going to lie. So, and I feel like I've worked with so many different people, but one of the things that stands out to me is my very first job out of college. I was on a government contract, working in a technical capacity, working on a government contract, and was playing in a lab. And one of the guys that I was working with said, "Hey, do whatever you want to do to this system. You can't break it. We can always undo and rebuild it." And I think having that confidence and that power to know that if you play with things and break them, it's okay. Not in a customer environment, obviously, but still, that's how you learn, right? And so by breaking it is how over the years I've learned and gotten better. And like Hannah, you talked about, I think we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. And so having that confidence that don't worry, you can't break it, we can always rebuild it, has been very beneficial.
That is such great advice. And you're right. I think sometimes we're so afraid to make a mistake. We're so afraid to break something that we don't push ourselves. And at the end of the day, if we're not pushing ourselves, we're not taking some of those chances within reason, right? We don't want to bring down the customer's environment, right? But yeah, that's where we find our limits. That's where we grow and learn. Such good advice. Okay, we're just a few more quick ones. Lara, you and I bump into each other. I have just got my first pre-sales role, and I bump into you in an elevator and I say, oh my goodness, Lara, I just saw you on LinkedIn Live. I got my first, any advice for me? And we may have 30 seconds.
Oh gosh. I think the biggest thing is, again, getting the first 30 days. I like to do the 30, 60 day, 90 days. And I know I only have 30 seconds, but it's what are you going to do within those first 30 days? How comfortable and how confident are you going to be with just learning, like, what does the company do? So being able to have your own elevator pitch. So, hey, congratulations, you work for this company. What do you do? And having that confidence within those first 30 days to be able to say, oh, I work for X and here's what we do. And then to build upon that. So first and foremost, get to know the company, get to know the product, get your speak down so that you know who you're working for, what you're doing, and maybe tie that into your point of view, like you were talking about, Hannah, right? What is your company's point of view and what's your point of view within your company?
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. So many of us forget that we represent the company, right? You are a steward of the company, and we need to know how to talk about the company and what we do. Fantastic. Hannah, I turn around and there you are, and I ask you the same question.
Yeah, I would say enjoy being new because you're only new once. Make sure you're taking this time to really learn and listen. And if you do that, you will have a lot of time to show off before you know it.
That's good advice. And in all fairness, she did have a minute to think about her response. So
I did. I wrote it down.
right?
So
I
I
was
took
going to say
advantage of the good start I had.
You know what though? That's brilliant because your newbie tag carries you for so long, right? And to take advantage of that, where you can have that time to learn, and that window closes, and you can't go back to learning. You're right. So make sure enjoy it.
Yeah. Once you raise your hand, that fire hose has started. Can't go back.
Well, and I mean, we could do a whole hour program on being a new manager. Because when you're a new leader, you have there's sort of like a certain window of time where you can sort of make some changes, make some investments, and do some things, and then that window closes, right? So, Lara, we may have to have a circle back on that one. All right, final question. I'll put it out on the table, and sort of like the Family Feud. Either one of you can hit the button first. If either of you could ask me one question, what might it be?
What have you seen in the most successful pre-sales leaders? You have such a large network. Like, what are the top 3 qualities you see in the most successful leaders?
Top 3 qualities. I'm gonna say, I used this term earlier, other-centered, is that they sincerely put their team first. Number 1, they have a plan. They have a structure and a plan. And they have the courage to make the difficult decisions. Those are 3 thoughts that come to mind immediately. Very good question.
I'll ask you, Chris, and especially because I'll do a little, your 6 habits you've got that you have so succinctly that, by the way, anytime I have a new engineer come onto my team, that's the book that I send to them.
Well, that's very nice to hear. Thank you.
But how have you seen the role evolve? Have those habits that they're there foundationally, but what else has changed over the years?
Really good question. If I could, and by the way, I only wrote the book, not even 3 years ago, and yet the world has changed so much. It was almost outdated within a year. There's 2 thoughts that come to mind. The first is discovery has changed. In the book, I talk a lot about, quote, the technical discovery call. And to me, that's becoming a thing of the past. And discovery is more of an ongoing process. And I've become a huge fan of discovery in disguise, which is, well, let's give them an introductory demo, but the purpose is not to convince them of anything. The purpose is actually to get them talking, right? And really that's discovery, but we're showing a demo. So it feels like they're seeing what they want to see. The only other thought that I have is, in the book, I don't talk about the evaluation, the POC or the POV. And I think that seems to become a growing part, and more companies seem to depend on some sort of more formal POC or POV to close deals. And And it's sort of this shift left, what I call shift left, shift right phenomenon. What do I mean? Pre-sales are getting involved earlier in the funnel, right? Pipeline generation activities, that's shift left, but we're getting more and more involved in customer success and post-sales activities. That's the shift right. So, the demand is up, the supply is down in terms of the number of people, and we're being stretched thinner. So those are a few things that come to mind for me. I don't know if any of those sort of resonate with you, Lara.
100%. And I think, by the way, if you did a book on POCs, POVs, evals, it would be the size of War and Peace, because there's so much that comes to when you do. Oh my gosh, that's a 2-hour discussion in itself.
Well, you're 100% right. And you know how I write, which is to say sort of, slim down. So I don't know. I have a few ideas kicking around. Ladies, you have both been such wonderful guests. Thank you so much. I know we took a full hour. So for those of you who were online with us, and there's too many people to name, thank you so much for chiming in and joining. Hannah Bloking, find her on LinkedIn, connect with her. She's fantastic. Lara Meadows, same. Find her on LinkedIn. This will be reposted. Ladies, thank you so much. Hang around for just a minute. I'm going to give you your parting gifts. And to everybody else, I'm going to say farewell. By the way, all my colleagues tell me to remind people, go to techsalesadvisors.com to check out our training. Go to demodoctor.com for some online training, and follow #TechSalesAdvice if you want to see more of these. Otherwise, ladies, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.